You're watching the second-degree murder trial of former Marine Jason Riley King out of San Diego, California. His victims, 5 medical students who were in a car he was driving the wrong way, drunk, down a highway when his pickup truck crashed into their Toyota Prius, killing 2 of them and seriously injuring 3 others. I'm here with Jessica Ramirez, who's a criminal defense attorney. Her practice is based out of Newark, New Jersey. We were just listening to testimony of Highway Patrol Officer Brad Clinkscales as he dissects the crime scene photos and talks about the damage to the Prius. I'm thinking to myself, like, this is just totally irrelevant because the crash itself is not being disputed. So why do we have to sit there and hear analysis for like half an hour or more about every single detail of what the car looked like after the accident? Do you have any explanation for this?
No, I feel the same way, and usually I look over at jurors and they're falling asleep. But the prosecution does have to prove each factor beyond a reasonable doubt, and that's what they have to do, unfortunately. But yes,
you need this level of detail to establish that the accident happened and his car crashed into theirs?
Again, I don't think so, and I think the jurors don't think so either, but that is the law, and they have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And the state has all the money in the world, right? The taxpayers, and they can do it, and they're going to go for overkill, and that's why they always get convictions.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes when it's disputed, you need to go into to establish that that person was involved in the accident, et cetera, but like you mentioned, I mean, a lot of times you see the jurors falling asleep on the stand, and then, I mean, if you're going to go into this detailed expert analysis for so long, then it's like give them a Red Bull or let them take a break or something so that they can get themselves back on track, because then they might miss some critical testimony.
And they're losing money, right? I mean, once they're doing jury duty, so I mean, yeah,
I think we're going to come back to us here in the studio because they're on break, so we can just continue to talk about the trial. So if the technicians back there, our lovely technicians, want to bring us back on camera whenever you're ready. But he was charged with taken a class, this Marine, just 8 days before, where it was discussed drunk driving, the repercussions, you know, safety, not doing it. And so because he had that knowledge, he's charged with murder instead of manslaughter. Is that a proper application of this second-degree murder statute? Because does it imply intent because he took a course and he had knowledge?
That's definitely the state's reasoning. I think it's problematic. I think that because if that's the case, anytime that we're going to take, or we have to take any type of course on bomb threats, on anything, that we're going to be held to that higher standard because something happens afterwards. I mean, I think it's definitely problematic. And I believe that they made a motion to dismiss on that same issue. The judge denied it, but I think the judge did say that is a problem. It is an issue. I mean, if that's the case, then any time that you take a training, you're going to be charged with murder because something happens or there is a murder. I think it's problematic.
I guess the argument is if you had knowledge of what could happen, that transfers to intent for the second you get in the car on that very night. Again. Is that transferable? Yeah, it's not like, this isn't like the felony murder rule where you can transfer intent from one person participating in a crime with another. This is saying that, well, because you understood the consequences of your actions, that means you had the intent to go out and kill somebody that night.
Yeah, it is problematic. Again, you have to, was it deliberate? Because I took this training course, when I got into my car, I deliberately wanted to do this because I've had this training. It just doesn't make any sense. There's no correlation. And I think it's bad reasoning.
But it totally contradicts the defense because they're saying, well, he shouldn't have been charged with murder because he had no knowledge. How can they make that argument when clearly he took the course 8 days before?
Well, again, it goes to, did he we're looking at defining murder. We're looking at his mindset. Was he deliberate? Did he mean to go and murder these people? Was that his mindset? And I don't think that it was, especially with a DUI. I mean, he was too drunk to even have a proper mindset.
Yeah. I mean, another argument here that we're seeing is a lot of people told him, don't do it, don't drive. It's not clear whether they said to him, you're drunk, don't drive. But they did say, you're not in a state, don't drive. And that's why he's charged with murder.
Does he remember this? We don't know. Did he black out? We don't know. Again, did he deliberately mean to kill these people? Or his actions, did he concentrate? Was that his intention? Was that his decision to do this? And I don't believe so, and that is the definition of murder. I keep going back to he is going to pay for his crime. I don't want anybody thinking that I'm making light out of this, that he shouldn't go to prison. I think that he is going to go to prison. Again, should it be so severe? Should it be a murder conviction? I don't believe so.
Yeah. Now, what do you think is the defense's strongest argument against it being a murder conviction, besides saying this whole thing that, oh, he didn't have the pre-existing knowledge? And a lot of people are saying, how can we know what was in this guy's head? So is that the defense, that, hey, we can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he did have the intent to commit murder, therefore you have to deduce that because we don't know, there's reasonable doubt there?
I think that's it. I think you hit it right on the head. We don't know what was in his head. There was no planning. He was out drinking. He made a horrible mistake with dire consequences. He's going to pay for his crime. But was that his intent? Was his intent to murder somebody that day? No, his intent was to go out and be stupid and be careless and be reckless and get drunk and black out and not remember. Yeah. And unfortunately, he is going to pay for the rest of his life.
Potentially. Well, you're saying because he would have to live with the guilt of it.
Absolutely.
Even if he gets out of jail earlier than life.
And I mean, he is going to go to prison. I mean, he did kill these people. His actions resulted in a death, and they're not disputing that. They're saying, we did it.
Yeah. The question here is he going to be convicted of murder or the manslaughter?
Correct.
That's really the question. So let's toss to a clip from yesterday of an officer as he walks us through the crash scene that he approached.
You work for the California Highway Patrol?
I do.
How long have you worked there?
Coming up on 9 years now.
What is your current assignment with the California Highway Patrol?
I am a traffic officer within the department.
And have you held that position the entire 9 years that you've been with CHP?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, in order to be an officer with the California Highway Patrol, do you have to have some training or go through an academy in order to learn the tricks of the trade?
Yes, ma'am.
What kind of academy did you go through?
It's a 6-month living academy in Sacramento.
And in that 6-month academy, did you learn about signs and symptoms of someone who's driving under the influence of alcohol?
Yes, ma'am.
What sort of training have you had in not just that academy, but in your time as an officer regarding detecting someone who's driving under the influence of alcohol?
I've attended 2 different A-RIDE courses, which stands for Advanced Impairment Roadside Driving Enforcement, which is a bridge between DUI and alcohol DUI and drug DUI before becoming a DRE or drug recognition expert. I've attended 2 of those, and those are 24-hour courses. I've also just had my time and experience working the road as an officer in those 9 years.
Was there a course that you had to take when you were at the academy that dealt with driving under the influence investigations?
Yes, ma'am.
And how long was that course?
It's a 52-hour course.
When you were at the academy and through the A-RIDE classes, did you learn the signs and symptoms of impairment that you're looking for?
Yes, ma'am.
Are there any sort of physical signs that you look for to determine whether or not someone's impaired with alcohol?
Yes, ma'am.
What are some of those physical symptoms?
We look for unsteady gait, red watery eyes, slurred speech, motor functions. If their motor functions are a little bit slower than normal. There's the actual more physical things we look for is the strong odor coming from their breath in person. You look for nystagmus in eyes, and then a field sobriety test, which we learn to also help detect that stuff.
And if I was to cut off kind of your training experience to May of last year, would it be fair to say that that is about, or sorry, May of 2015, would it be fair to say that you had at that point in time about 6.5 years on with stage B?
Yes, ma'am.
And in that time up to that May of 2015, how many DUI-related investigations were you involved in?
Between 300 and 400.
And in those 300 or 400 investigations, was there ever a time when you determined someone was not under the influence of alcohol?
Yes, ma'am.
How often does that happen?
From time to time, I would say 10% of the time.
And up until from when you started through May of 2015, had you ever had to be involved in an investigation of a DUI-related crash?
Yes, ma'am.
How many of those do you think were involved in the investigation of?
Between 50 and 100.
When you're involved in a DUI-related crash, are you always the individual who's doing the DUI evaluation portion of the investigation?
If I'm the handling officer, yes, ma'am.
And is that those 50 to 100?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, when there is a DUI-related crash, is it fair to say that there are times when someone will be assigned to do the DUI portion of the crash, and someone else might investigate the dynamics of the crash itself?
When you say dynamics, are you talking about, I'm not quite sure what you're asking.
Let me make it clear then. At any point in time, if you respond to a DUI-related crash, are you responsible for that entire crash, or are there times when you're just responsible for doing a DUI evaluation and someone else might look after handling the crash?
As the investigating officer, it's the whole thing's mine. So, but then we will, as an officer who went in charge of that scene, I will give responsibilities to other officers as they come on scene.
Now, I'd like to take you back to the early morning hours of May the 16th, 2015, at around 1:37 in the morning. Were you working that early morning?
Yes, I was.
What shift were you working?
I was on the graveyard shift.
Is that a shift that you were familiar with?
Yes, ma'am.
What time did your shift begin?
I believe that was starting about 8 o'clock at night.
At around 1:37, did you receive a radio call?
I did.
What was the nature of that call?
We received a call of a vehicle traveling wrong way, southbound in the northbound lanes of the 163 with its hazard lights on.
When you say we, who are you talking about?
Me and my partner.
Who was your partner?
It was Officer Michael Oka.
Do you remember where you were when you heard that radio call?
We were Mission Gorge, just west of, or just north of the I-8.
And when you received that radio call, were they able to say where on the 163 the vehicle was?
The initial reports was just south of Genesee Avenue.
When you received that radio call, what did you do?
We immediately started to respond from our location. We started heading westbound on I-8, trying to see if we can intercept.
When you say we, who was driving that night?
I was.
When you say that you're trying to intercept, what do you mean by that?
We're trying to see if we can catch up to the vehicle itself. We're going to try to get in front of it so maybe we can get the vehicle stopped.
What is the next thing that happened?
As we're responding, we received an update from our dispatch that the vehicle that was traveling the wrong way collided with another vehicle.
And what did you do when you learned that information?
We kind of sped up our, I increased our speed of our patrol vehicle and was kind of get to the scene very hastily.
And what route did you take to get to the scene?
I took the westbound 8 to southbound 163. I then turned around at Genesee or University Avenue and came back north on the 163, bringing a traffic brake into the scene.
What do you mean bringing a traffic brake?
Traffic brakes when we run it back and forth across the lanes, trying to slow down traffic and actually trying to bottleneck it so when we come up to a scene, we don't know exactly what we have, so we can address the scene when we get there.
Your Honor, may the record reflect that the witness was doing a movement with his right hand and kind of a serpentine kind of movement going back and forth with his hand when he was gesturing about creating a traffic break?
Yes.
Officer Capitaio, I'm showing you what's marked as exhibit number 3. Do you recognize what's depicted in exhibit number 3?
Yes, ma'am.
What are we looking at, exhibit number 3?
You're looking at a image of the northbound 163 and the I-8 interchange.
Commissioner Thomas-Ryan?
Yes, you may publish. Yeah, I'm going to assume you have no objection, Mr.
This is actually already been.
Officer Capitaio, you mentioned that you came along the I-8. Is it fair to say that in exhibit number 3, the I-8 is depicted and actually marked on exhibit number 3?
Yes, ma'am.
When you came along the I-8, you mentioned that you were going in a westbound direction, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Then where did you travel after you got off the I-8?
We took the westbound I-8 to the southbound 163, and then we traveled southbound on 163, and it's not right, you can't really see the ramp itself, but we exited the freeway at University Avenue, and then turned around and came back onto the northbound 163, where you can see the on-ramp down at the base here.
There's a pointer there to your left-hand side. So if we look at exhibit number 3, there's the I-8, and then there's the 163, and then you mentioned that you came along the I-8, off the 163, but then you came back onto the 163.
Yes, ma'am.
Is the on-ramp shown anywhere here on the exhibit marked as exhibit number 3 to come back, or the pathway that you took to come back going northbound on 163?
Yes, ma'am.
If you could point to that, please.
It'd be this little concrete area right here.
May the record reflect the witness has pointed to an area that runs north-south that is just to the left of the exhibit marker number 3 and to the right of what is on the diagram marked as 2C.
Yes.
When you came back onto the freeway, you ran a traffic break. What did you see once you got closer to the I-8?
As we approached the 8 itself, I started seeing brake lights. I saw a vehicle stopped on the shoulder, and then as I got even closer, I saw a vehicle, a large pickup truck, on its side blocking the number 1 lane.
So what did you do?
We brought traffic to a stop, stopped all traffic, and then me and my partner exited our vehicle, and I approached the truck.
Were you the first emergency personnel on scene?
Yes, ma'am.
How long did it take you from the time you first heard the radio call about the wrong way driver until you got to the location of the crash?
6-7 minutes.
What did you do once you got to the scene of the crash?
At that point, start to investigate and assess the scene to see what's going on, to figure out who's involved and if there's any injuries and whatnot.
Where did you park your vehicle?
We stopped it in the lane, so it would have been somewhere in the number 2 lane of the freeway.
And did you stop your vehicle actually correctly positioned in the lane, or did you move it into a perpendicular position?
To be honest, I believe I just stopped it in the middle of the lanes, so I was facing in a northerly direction.
And do you recall whether or not you stopped it before you came upon any of the damaged vehicles or the debris in the roadway?
It was just south of the first vehicle, or the first vehicle we had seen.
And that first vehicle that you saw, what was that?
It was a white Ford 350.
What's the next thing that you did?
I exited my patrol vehicle and approached the pickup truck, and there was a group of people outside the vehicle. And I remember asking, "Where's the driver?" And they pointed into the vehicle. So at which point I looked inside the vehicle.
And did you see the driver inside the vehicle?
Yes, I did.
Now, did you then stay by the vehicle, or what did you do?
I went ahead and kept moving forward, and I had Officer Oka actually stay at the scene with the vehicle and start talking to the people who were there.
And as you continued on through the scene, what did you do?
I started to assess the scene as I'm approaching. I started approaching a vehicle that was stopped in the 2 and 3 lane, just north of the pickup truck.
What kind of vehicle was that?
It was a Toyota Prius.
And what did you do when you got to that vehicle?
As I approached, there was I got flagged down by a party gentleman, and he said that he had told me that they had pulled a male out of the vehicle, and he was laying on the ground.
And when this is happening, are you also calling for additional help? Is that something that you do, or are you just assessing the scene as you're going through it?
I was assessing the scene. I haven't asked for additional units yet at that time.
Now, just to backtrack a bit, when you noticed that the first vehicle, that truck, that F-350, did you notice whether that truck had its lights or its hazard lights on?
When we got on scene, I could see that the flashers were still, hazard lights were still flashing.
When you got to the first vehicle, or the second vehicle that you got to, the Toyota,
Yes, ma'am.
did you see someone on the ground, or were you just told there was someone on the ground?
I didn't see him initially, but then the gentleman had pointed him out to me.
And did you provide any sort of immediate care or for that person that was on the ground?
I just triaged him quickly, saw that, felt for a pulse, saw that he was breathing, and then I asked the gentleman who was there, seeing that he was alive and breathing, I asked him to stay with him, and then I kept moving forward.
Why did you do that?
Because there's nothing I could really do. There's no real aid I could render at that immediate moment, and it's still an active scene. So I want to make sure we have everybody out of the vehicle. I want to make sure if there's people who might be in worse condition, we need to address them as soon as possible.
How long was it until you had the assistance of the fire department?
Maybe 5-6 minutes from the time I arrived.
And what were you doing in that time frame?
After I saw the gentleman on the ground, I asked if I was told that there was a couple other people in another vehicle that they had pulled out, and then I asked where the driver was for the Prius, and at that point somebody told me they were still in the car.
And after you, I'm assuming you then walked around all the way to the front of the scene to where the Prius was?
Yes, ma'am.
After you walked through where the Prius was and the other individuals, what were your responsibilities at that point in time?
At that point in time, I'm now the investigating officer, so I start requesting additional units, additional medical units, knowing I have multiple victims, and requesting other units to bring in brakes to shut down the freeway, and additional resources.
And you mentioned that it was about 6 minutes until the fire arrived, is that right?
Approximately, yes, ma'am.
And before the fire department arrived, were there any other CHP officers who were able to come and assist?
Not at that very immediate moment, no.
Now, because you became then the primary officer on the case, is it fair to say that you were responsible for investigating this case and the cause of the crash, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you do that?
Yes, ma'am.
At some point in time, did you have contact with the driver of the truck, the F-350?
I did.
When did you first have contact with that person?
When he was being placed into the back of the ambulance.
When he was placed in the back of the ambulance, did you ask him any questions about his name or anything like that?
Yes, ma'am.
Was he able to answer your questions?
Yes, ma'am.
And was he able to answer your questions in a meaningful way? Like he was answering responsively to what you were asking?
He was dazed and confused. When I asked him his name, he was able to tell me his name. His name was Jason. But when I asked him where he was coming from, he was giving me an odd answer. He gave me an odd answer.
When you were first speaking with him, did you notice any sort of unusual smell on him?
I did detect the odor of an alcoholic beverage.
Did you ask him about that?
Yes, I did.
Where were you when you asked him about his alcohol consumption?
I was in the back of the ambulance with him.
And what exactly did you ask him?
I asked him if he had been drinking during the night.
And what did he tell you?
He told me he had been drinking quite a bit.
That was his words, quite a bit?
Quite a bit, yes, ma'am.
And through your investigation, were you able to determine that this defendant was born 7/2/94?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, you mentioned that you had how long was the conversation that you had in the back of the ambulance?
Minute, maybe 2 minutes. It was very quickly. It was very quick. They were trying to get him transported from the scene.
And when they were trying to get him transported, did you go with him in the ambulance to the hospital?
No, ma'am.
At some point in time, though, did you later go to the hospital?
Yes, I did.
When did that happen?
At approximately, I arrived at the UCSD Medical Center approximately 2:59 to 2:59 in the morning.
And when you arrived to UCSD, just shy of 3 o'clock in the morning, did you contact the defendant again?
Yes, I did.
When you contacted the defendant, did you also, at that point in time, did you call someone to take a blood sample?
Yes, I did.
And when you contacted the defendant, he agreed to provide a blood sample, is that right?
That's correct.
What time did the phlebotomist come to draw the defendant's blood?
The exact time for her arrival, I don't recall. Because the time of arrival, I don't remember exactly, but I remember what time we did do the blood draw.
Well, when the phlebotomist gets to UCSD, what's the sequence of events that happens?
Usually when they arrive on scene, they hand us their paperwork, which is a call slip, and then there's several stickers that they attach to the blood vials and to the envelope. So I fill those out with the person's name, the charges, my name, my information as a witnessing officer, the time of the draw, and then I fill all that paperwork out, and then I hand it back to the blood tech. So,
And once you hand that back to the blood tech, what happens?
the blood tech will go ahead and then take the draw from the party and withdraw the blood from them, and then after they withdraw the blood, they attach those stickers to one sticker to each vial of blood, and then one to the envelope.
And then what happens with the blood once that happens?
They seal it, and they put it in a vanilla envelope, or a manila envelope, and then they seal it with evidence tape. They sign the tape itself, and then they hand that to me.
Now, you mentioned that you weren't sure what time the phlebotomist arrived to UCSD, but you are aware of what time she drew the blood. Is that right?
That's correct.
Were you there when you witnessed the blood draw?
Yes, ma'am.
What time was that?
3:18 in the morning.
And after that, did you actually witness the phlebotomist then turning the vial upside down several times to mix it with the contents of the vial?
Yes, ma'am.
And then she went through the process to put the labels on it that you mentioned and then give it to you in an envelope, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
What did you then do with that envelope?
It then stays with me. I had it my clipboard, so I attached it to my clipboard, and then wherever my clipboard goes, I go.
And at some point in time, did you actually have to impound that into evidence?
Yes, ma'am.
And how did that go? How did that happen?
Eventually, when I was relieved from the hospital, I went back to my office, and at which point I booked it into the evidence refrigerator at our office.
And what time were you actually relieved from the hospital?
It was around 7 o'clock sometime, 7 o'clock in the morning, give or take.
And where did you actually book that blood vial then into evidence?
We have a refrigerator in our office. It's a secured refrigerator. I drop the blood vials in. I fill out the paperwork for it, including the booking forms, the paperwork for the county, for the crime lab, and then the evidence forms as well.
And now, when you were speaking with the defendant at the hospital, did you notice any physical symptoms on his body as to where he might be positioned within his vehicle?
Yes, ma'am.
What did you notice?
I saw he had seat belt marks onto his left shoulder, from his left shoulder, neck, across his chest.
And where did the seatbelt marks begin?
Towards his left shoulder and neck, and then it ran across his chest in a diagonal manner towards his right hip.
So it ran from his left shoulder then to his right hip, is that fair to say?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, in your dealings with, would it be fair to say that you had a very brief encounter or dealing with the defendant at the scene of the crash? Is that fair to say?
Yes, ma'am.
And when you were at the hospital, how long would you say that you spent in the defendant's company?
Initially, probably a good hour, if not a little bit longer.
And in that hour that you spent with him at the hospital, was that the hour around 3 o'clock in the morning?
Yes, ma'am.
And during that time frame, at that point in time, did you have any questions or did you ask him anything during that time frame?
I reintroduced myself. I explained to him that I had placed him under arrest for the DUI, and that's when I advised him of the applied consent, and I explained that to him.
When you made the arrest for the DUI, what did you use to have a foundation for your opinion?
I based it off the fact that when I contacted him, I smelled the odor of alcohol coming from his breath. His fact that his eyes were red and watery. The fact that he admitted to drinking. And the fact that he was driving. I had witnessed him in the vehicle by himself, and that he had been involved in a collision.
At any point in time when you were speaking with him, was he able to tell you where he'd been drinking?
He was unsure at that time.
And would it be fair to say that when you were at the hospital, your contact with the defendant, he was on a gurney? Is that right?
That's correct.
So at some point in time, you made the decision or the determination that the defendant was under the influence of alcohol, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you determine whether or not there were any other vehicle code violations?
Well, the fact that he had been driving wrong way as well on the freeway.
And is that a violation of the vehicle code?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know what code section that is?
To be off the top of my head, no, ma'am.
Were you involved in the investigation of this crash?
While on scene, when we had other units responding in, I started to assign people different tasks. I assigned officers to give statements. I assigned other officers to start the factual diagram, the sketching of the scene, to get measurements. We had other officers do the 180s, the storage reports for the vehicles, other officers to take pictures. So I assigned everybody that kind of task as well.
And were you also responsible for any sort of follow-up or witness interviews?
I did do some of the follow-up and some of the witness interviews, yes, ma'am.
And all that is part of putting together this DUI investigation, is that right?
That's correct, ma'am, yes.
So, if we know that the blood draw was at 3:18 in the morning, and the first radio call that you got was at 1:37, what time was the crash?
Approximately 01:39, so 2 minutes later. That's our approximate.
And why is it just an approximate?
Because we have to go off of what we get. So a 911 call, so a lot of times a 911 call may be slightly delayed from the time that somebody's reporting it to the time we actually receive it. So it's a guesstimation.
So in this case, besides coming to an opinion regarding whether or not the defendant was prepared and kind of coordinating everything, were you ultimately responsible for putting together all of the diagrams and all the evidence in the case, or did you have assistance with that?
We had assistance with that.
And who helped you out with that?
Officer Rutherford initially started the legend and documenting the scene. Then we had Officer Oka, who started the initial sketch and diagram of the scene. But then we eventually brought in the MATE team to come in and actually do the...
And welcome back to the Law&Crime Network. I'm your host, Amy Dash, and we're covering a trial out of San Diego now, a former Marine charged with second-degree murder, the killing of 2 medical students, and bodily injury of 3 others when he was driving the wrong way down a highway after drinking excessively at a bar. And I'm here with Jessica Ramirez, who's a criminal defense attorney out of Newark. Thank you for being with us. We've been talking about this case at length, and the fact that his alcohol level, more than an hour after the accident, was nearly double the limit. Are they going to go off of that because that's an established blood alcohol level? Is that what they're introducing to show the level of intoxication? Or are they allowed to infer that if it was double the amount of the legal limit an hour and a half after, well then maybe it was triple the amount of the legal limit right before the accident? I mean, how much does it matter how drunk he was? Is it he was over the legal limit and that's the same level of culpability, or the more you drink, the more responsible you are?
The state can definitely try to do that, but they're going to go off what the evidence says. Mm-hmm. What is this number? And I mean, the number is pretty high.
Yeah.
So,
and that matters, right?
It does matter. I mean, he was very drunk. Very drunk. And like you said, and you can infer it was an hour later. And I think that the prosecution is going to try to get that in somehow, so it's in the juror's mind that he was probably even really more drunk when he caused the scene, and it started to wear off once he was questioned.
Yeah. A lot of the victims who survived the accident, the 3 medical students, the male medical students, a lot of them don't remember exactly what happened because they just, upon impact, their memory went blank. Does that matter, the testimony of the people in the car? Sometimes that can help a case, can it? Versus people who just have no clue what happened.
I don't think it's going to matter in this case because, again, the defense is saying, listen, we did it. Like, he was the cause of this accident. He was drunk. He was not sober. He did this. So I don't think that it's going to matter. I think, you know, you have to put your victims up there. You have to show that you know, the impact and what they went through was so terrible that there is memory loss. But I don't think it's going to matter one way or the other.
Now, they were also mentioning, and we talked about this before, that in Jason King, the former Marine's hometown of Indiana, it said there were 1,000 people there. That was the population, so a small town. A single stoplight, and never before had a DUI arrest. So even though he attended this course with the Marine Academy 8 days prior about drunk driving and how you shouldn't do it and what could happen if you do, saying, well, he never attended the types of DUI programs that are required after conviction in California. That's what the defense attorney is saying. And he never signed an acknowledgement that if he killed someone in a drunk driving crash, he could be charged with murder. I mean, you don't have to sign an acknowledgement or have been convicted and nothing happened, luckily, and then you go to a course and all of a sudden you're more educated than if, you know, you haven't committed anything and this is your first offense. So what kind of an argument is that?
I think it's the defense's strategy that we all, as defense attorneys, we want to make our client look human. We want to explain, not so much excuse, because I get this all the time from the state or from people that are not agreeing with me. You're making excuses. No, I'm not making excuses. I'm trying to explain where my client's mind was at.
Right, because state of mind is so critical.
And, you know, I'm going back to what I talked about before. Again, you know, I'm not saying it's right, but there are some states, some communities, some cultures that driving drunk is not a big deal yet. They're not there. And again, we just want to explain to the jury, he's not this horrible, mean person, and this is what he wanted to do. This is where he was from.
Right.
He, you know, it was a small town. Drinking and driving is not that big of a deal. It's nothing that he ever it wasn't an issue that came up. Again, it's just trying to humanize your client and explain where his mind was.
And maybe that would be more acceptable if he hadn't taken a course 8 days before, but it's when you make the argument after it's revealed that he has, it's almost like saying, well, he wasn't educated enough. Like, this one course wasn't enough. So you have to take multiple courses, or you have to sign an affidavit, or you have to be convicted, and then, you know, have that experience in order to be understanding of the consequences of driving drunk. Well, so I think it's less of a strong argument in that sense because he had the course.
I think this course, if we start going down that path, it also becomes very problematic as a whole, as to anything, any course that we take. If we take a course on, you know, the proper use of a seatbelt or the proper use of putting a child seat in, and then something happens, are we going to be held accountable or to a higher standard because we took this course?
Well, that's the argument they're making. I mean, if you have the knowledge, then you should be held to a higher standard. That's what they're saying.
That's the state's position, yes.
Right.
But I think that, and I think that the judge even said it was a problematic argument, but he was going to leave it to the jury to decide, and the jury will have common sense. And should he be held to a higher standard? I think, you know, it's going to be difficult. Yes, he should have known better. Yes, he did have the knowledge, but should he be held to a higher standard? Should he be charged with murder?
Yeah, and as we talked about before, knowledge of something doesn't necessarily equate with the intent to kill.
Exactly.
So that's really one of the biggest problems here, and people in our chat rooms and a lot of people discussing the case are saying, well, how can you ever really know what's in a person's mind? And that's a problem a lot of times when you're trying to prove mens rea, as it's called, criminal intent. And so let's say you were the prosecutor. I know you're used to being the defense attorney. Put yourself on the flip side. How do you prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he intended to kill that night?
You can't, especially when he was drinking. And
but we see convictions in cases like this, so it's done. Like, what would you do?
I mean, it's done, but I don't ever agree with it because it's, I really do believe murder as defined by law, you have to have an intention. You have to be deliberate. That was your plan.
So what evidence is that? Planning? Yes. Only planning? Then how can you even find a conviction in a drunk driving case? So then do you think drunk driving cases should never be prosecuted at the level of murder?
I don't believe that, no.
You don't. So you think it's all...
It should be manslaughter.
Manslaughter.
Absolutely.
Because of the recklessness and the gross negligence.
Yes. That's always been my personal opinion about DUIs. I mean, I know it's a terrible thing, and I think, again, they're going to pay for it. They're going to go to prison, but for it to be a murder charge, I don't think DUI should be charged with murder.
But sometimes in certain jurisdictions, second-degree murder is defined as just a conscious disregard for human life.
Well, but not in this one. So
yeah, but it says that, you know, that there was a killing in the course of another unlawful activity. So that's sort of how they justify it. Here it's pretty clear, drunk driving's illegal. So if you're committing, it's sort of like the felony murder rule. If you commit a felony and in the course of the felony somebody is killed, well then you're liable for that killing even if you were just a participant in a burglary. Here you kind of got the same thing where it's, well, if you're doing something unlawful in the first place and somebody's killed, then you're responsible because you should have known that breaking the law could lead to even worse consequences.
Again, we have to go back to what was his intentions, what was his decision, what did he want to do, did he want to purposely kill these people, and I don't think that was the case.
Yeah.
So I don't believe, again, that it should be a murder conviction.
Does his background matter at all? Do you think that the jury will take into account that he was a former Marine?
I think that the jury is going to take into account everything. The victims, that they were doctors, that they were innocent. They're going to take how they lost the memory, the impact. I think everything is going to be taken into account. And yes, because you can't help that. That's just human nature.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. We had such a great conversation.
Yes, it was great.
And Aaron Keller will be up next to continue hosting this trial, which is Pacific Standard Time, so we expect it to go a little bit later here on the East Coast. For now, we're just going to toss to some trial testimony from yesterday. Again, an officer who responded to the scene of this crash on the highway after a Ford pickup truck that was being driven by a former Marine crashed into a Toyota Prius carrying 5 medical students, leaving 2 of them dead.
What time did you first